Hey guys, tonight we begin not with dragons or castles or epic sword fights, but with something far grittier, colder, and frankly, much more impressive. The everyday, brutal winter survival of medieval peasants. Yes, those muddy, underfed, overworked background characters from your favorite historical dramas. The ones who don't get names. They didn't wear crowns. They didn't ride horses. But they did somehow manage to survive winters that would make your Wi-Fi-dependent soul curl up and cry. Before we dig into it, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this kind of slow, sarcastic descent into historical misery. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always fun to know who's falling asleep to frostbite tonight. Okay, now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for some medieval ambience. Let the low hum lull you into a false sense of comfort while we venture back to a time when staying warm was less about setting the thermostat and more about wondering which of your livestock you could safely cuddle without getting kicked in the face. Because when you think of medieval life, you probably imagine knights clanking around in armor, feasts with whole roast pigs, and colorful fairs with jolly lute music. But for the average peasant, winter wasn't festive. It was a season-long hostage situation with the weather. And the only way out was to get creative or get frostbite. Imagine living in a one-room hut made of mud and sticks, walls thinner than your last excuse to avoid going outside. No insulation, no glass windows, just a small hole covered with something that used to be part of a cow. And the cold? The cold didn't just seep in. It kicked the door open, unpacked its things, and asked what was for dinner. Congratulations. You're not in a fairy tale anymore. You're in survival mode. Welcome to Winter, Peasant Edition. Let's begin. Picture this. You wake up in the middle of the night because your nose has frozen. Not metaphorically, literally. It feels like someone dipped it in a snow cone and left it there. You reach for a blanket. There isn't one, just a scratchy wool cloak that smells like goat and poor decisions. Welcome to your home, a one-room masterpiece of medieval architecture, also known as Wattle and daub, or as you'll soon be calling it, the wind tunnel that ruined your life. Let's break it down. Your walls are made from sticks woven together like a really sad basket, then smeared with a charming paste of mud, straw, and animal dung. Yes, zoom. Not because peasants were gross. Okay, maybe a little, but because dung was cheap, sticky, and somewhat insulating. It was the medieval version of spray foam, just with more smell and fewer safety regulations. But here's the problem. No matter how artistically you smear that dung, it's still dung. And it cracks, and flakes, and welcomes in every gust of freezing wind like it's a beloved guest returning from war. You might as well hang a sign that says, "Drafts welcome here." There's no glass in the windows, assuming you even have windows. If you're lucky, there's a tiny square hole in the wall covered with stretched animal skin that flaps wildly in the breeze and vaguely smells like last winter. If you're very lucky, you have wooden shutters. But don't get excited, they don't close properly, and even if they did, the wind would probably rip them off during the next storm. And the roof? Thatched. Sounds cozy, right? Wrong. Thatched roofs were about as waterproof as a straw hat in a thunderstorm. After a few months of snow and rain, your roof starts to sag. Then it starts to leak. Then something, maybe a squirrel, maybe something worse, falls out of it directly onto your dinner. Bon appétit. The inside temperature of your home isn't really inside temperature. It's more like marginally less cold than outside. If it's 20 below out there, it's a cheerful 16 below in here. Think of it as rustic climate continuity. And the floor? Not wood, not stone, just dirt. Dirt that turns to mud when it rains or snows. Dirt that freezes into jagged ridges you can stub your toe on while trying to get to the fire in the dark. Sometimes people tried to lay down straw to soften it. Sometimes they just gave up and called it natural flooring. If you're lucky, the ground is merely damp. If you're unlucky, congratulations, you now have an indoor swamp. And speaking of the fire, let's be clear, it's trying its best. But your home is one giant, open invitation to the elements. So while your fire bravely sputters in the hearth, the cold breeze dances around the room like it owns the place, which, honestly, it kind of does. And still, somehow, you live here. You patch cracks with moss. You shove cloth into gaps. You huddle in corners. You build walls out of stubbornness and sheep grease and hope. Because this isn't just your house. It's your shield against death. A shield that leaks, creaks, and smells like a wet barn. But it's all you've got. And it's gonna have to do. Congratulations. You made it to nightfall in your medieval hut, also known as the cold box of disappointment and regret. The fire is down to embers. Your goat has claimed the warmest corner, and now it's time to do something that should be peaceful, human, and entirely normal. Sleep. Except it's not. Because in medieval winter, sleep is a gamble, and the stakes are high. You're not curling up under a thick duvet. You're not slipping into memory foam. You're not even guaranteed to wake up. What you're doing is entering a semi-conscious, full-body frostfight, a nightly struggle for survival where the prize is your own toes. Let's talk sleeping arrangements. Your bed is a generous word. It's probably a sack stuffed with hay, or straw, or old rushes, or, if you're living on the edge, just a blanket over dirt. No seats, no pillows, no matris, just lumps. Sharp, unforgiving lumps. It's the medieval equivalent of a rock garden with trust issues. You lie down in the dark, the kind of dark where your hand disappears in front of your face. The fire gives off a faint glow and nothing else. You curl up in your best cloak, which smells like smoke, damp wool, and a hint of existential dread. You pull your second tunic over your legs and hope it counts as insulation. And the cold, oh, the cold, it doesn't rest. It rises from the floor like a slow, wet curse. It drips from the walls. It sneaks through every gap you forgot to stuff with sheep hair. It creeps into your bones. You shift to warm one side, and the other freezes. You shift again. Repeat. Eternally. You want to sleep on your back. Great. Now your nose is the highest point on your body and first in line for frostbite. On your stomach? Congratulations, you're breathing in floor mold. On your side? Your hip will ache like it's 100 years old by sunrise, if you're still alive. And let's not forget your charming roommates. Fleas. That one mystery bug that only comes out when it's cold enough to regret your life choices. They're all here for the ride, treating your body like an all-you-can-eat buffet. Medieval pest control? That's the smoke from the fire. And it's already losing. Sometimes, someone in the family gets the genius idea to share a bed. Huddle together for warmth. Makes sense, right? Except now you're half asleep, half frozen, and 100% trapped under Uncle Wilhelm's elbow. If you move, you risk letting the cold in. If you don't, you get drooled on by Grandma. There is no winning. There's only survival. And every night, you go to bed thinking the same thing. Please, just let me wake up with all my fingers. Because frostbite doesn't ask permission. It just takes. And if you do wake up with everything still attached, even if it's numb, blue, and humming like a tuning fork, that's a win. Sleep, in the medieval winter, isn't rest. It's a test. A grim, hay-filled gauntlet where comfort is a fantasy and death is always just one cold breath away. Sweet dreams. Let's get one thing straight. In your medieval hut, the floor is not your friend. It is not passive. It is not neutral. It is not something you walk on and forget about. No, friend. The floor is the enemy. It is cold. It is alive. It is hungry. And it wants you. What you think of as the floor is, in fact, just dirt. Not floorboards. not stone, not anything you could classify as flooring in any sane civilization. It's just the same earth that's outside, except slightly trampled and possibly slightly cursed. You don't clean it, you tame it. Barely. And in winter, this floor turns into a creature of its own. During the day, it's hard and cracked like overcooked bread crust. At night, it becomes a frozen sponge of despair, drawing the warmth from your body like it's trying to recharge itself on your misery. Step on it barefoot, and you'll discover new kinds of pain, sharp, cold, ancient kinds that make your spine send hate mail to your brain. The cold doesn't just sit in the floor. It rises, slowly, relentlessly, like it knows you're trying to ignore it. It snakes up through the straw you've scattered around, your carpet, if you will, and pushes into your bones 1 inch at a time. You thought you were tough? The floor laughs. You thought your blanket would save you? The floor waits. You try to fight back. You spread a thick layer of straw across the dirt. Nature's insulation. Or so they said. Maybe it works for like 3 hours. Then the straw starts flattening. Then it starts rotting. Then it starts moving. Not by itself, of course, but with help from things that crawl. You're not sure what they are. You stopped asking questions after the third bite. Some folks use dried rushes instead. Long, fibrous grass, sometimes sprinkled with sweet herbs. Sounds romantic. Smells great for one day. After that, it's just another damp, decaying mess that squishes under your feet and smells like wet livestock and dead hope. And just like the straw, it eventually starts decomposing in place, becoming what we'll generously call a bioactive heating layer, and what your feet will accurately call disgusting. Let's say you're rich, relatively. You got a wooden frame for a bed, raised a few precious inches off the ground. Big flex, except that mattress is just a lumpy sack full of straw, and it still absorbs the cold like a sponge made of frost and sadness. It creaks, it crunches, it pokes you in places that should never be poked by dry grass. But it's better than the floor, marginally. And in case you were wondering, yes, everything you drop onto the floor at night is gone forever. You drop a sock, it is now a geological feature. You knock over your wooden spoon, it's been claimed by the mud gods. You roll out of bed, good luck. You are now one with the floor. The cold doesn't just bite, it devours. Parents would warn their children, don't play on the ground in winter. Not because of demons, not because of monsters, but because if you sat too long on the floor, you might never get up again. That's not hyperbole. That's experience. So yes, you can patch your walls. You can bank your fire. You can wear every single item of clothing you own at the same time. But if you forget about the floor, if you forget about the dark, sucking, bone-chilling floor, then winter has already won. And it will claim you one frozen footstep at a time. Let's not sugarcoat this. Your walls, the very structures meant to protect you from the elements, predators, and existential despair, are made of actual, literal crap. There's no gentle way to say it. Welcome to the age of Wattle and daub, where the building blocks of your home are sticks, mud, straw, and animal dung. A lot of dung. An uncomfortable, architecturally significant amount of dung. Now, before you recoil in modern horror, let's acknowledge the logic. Dung is cheap, it's abundant, it's sticky, and it does an okay job of filling gaps. In the Middle Ages, these were not minor selling points. These were miracle properties. You didn't have access to cement or foam insulation. You had a cow, and that cow had resources. So the medieval peasant thought, why not? And thus was born the technique. Weave a lattice of thin branches into your wooden frame. Slather it with a thick, goopy mixture of wet earth, chopped straw, and the freshest barnyard blessings you could find, and let it dry into something resembling a wall. Sort of, if you were skilled or had a lot of practice failing. The final result might look vaguely like stucco. From a distance, on a foggy day. But most of the time, It looked like what it was, a patchy, sagging, cracking layer of earthy regret, sloughing off with every cold gust like it just realized how bad of an idea this was. And don't think the poop content ends a construction. These walls don't age gracefully. They crumble, they peel, they weep. And every winter, like clockwork, you'll find yourself reapplying emergency daub by hand. Usually in the dark, usually while freezing, usually thinking. This cannot be how humans were meant to live. You grab a handful of half-frozen mud and manure, mix it with straw, slap it on the wall, and whisper a prayer. Maybe to God, maybe to the wall, maybe to your frozen fingers. It doesn't matter. At that moment, you're no longer a person. You're just a desperate, shivering patch of sentient mud trying to keep the wind out of your bedroom. Speaking of the wind, oh, the wind loves your walls. It finds every crack, every forgotten joint, every tiny draft-sized highway, and rushes through your home like a joyful poltergeist. You try to plug the holes with old cloth, tufts of wool, even moss. By midwinter, your home looks like it's being slowly eaten by a textile monster. But the wind? The wind laughs and enters anyway. And then there's the smell. Oh yes, because no matter how dry it is, no matter how well sealed, your house appears, you live in a giant compost pile. A flammable, fungal, mildly organic box of survival. When it's warm, it smells like a barn on a hot day. When it's cold, it smells like regret and mold. Either way, you stop noticing or die trying. But perhaps worst of all is the psychological effect. You sit there in your one room, wrapped in 5 layers of itchy wool, staring at the wall, knowing exactly what it's made of. And it stares back, mocking you, reminding you that your life is being held together by twigs, and stubbornness. And you know what? You keep living in it, because that wall, terrible, leaky, horrifying, is the only thing standing between you and the snowstorm that wants to eat your bones. You defend it like your life depends on it, because it does. So yes, the walls are made of crap, but so were you apparently, because you're still here. Let's not beat around the frosted bush. In a medieval winter, fire is not a convenience. Fire is not a luxury. Fire is God. It is your sun, your lifeline, your last, flickering defense against the long, creeping fingers of death. You don't enjoy the fire. You worship it. At the center of your freezing hovel squats a shallow hearth. No mantle, no bricks, no iron stove. Just a depression in the ground, surrounded by stones, and the faint hope that something in there might catch and burn. If you're lucky, a bit of dry peat. If you're really lucky, a few logs that didn't get soaked in the last storm. If you're unlucky, and statistically you are, it's damp twigs, smoky disappointment, and tears. This is where your day begins and ends. You huddle around it in the morning, hands outstretched like you're summoning magic. You sit next to it at night, watching it die like a slow, glowing farewell. You whisper to it. You bargain with it. You feed it like a pet that might murder you if ignored. And the smoke. Oh, the smoke. You think you're going to breathe? That's adorable. You've got no chimney. Just a hole in the thatch where the smoke might go if it's feeling cooperative. Most of the time, it just settles around you like a second atmosphere. Thick, heavy, choking, and yet somehow comforting. Because where there's smoke, there's fire. And where there's fire, there's life. Your eyes sting. Your throat rasps. Your clothes reek of wood smoke, sweat, and damp wool. You haven't smelled fresh air since September. You think you see less lice now, but it might just be the visibility. Doesn't matter. You stay near the fire. Always. And it's not just warmth, it's everything. It cooks your food, boils your water, dries your clothes, badly, hardens your tools, and gives your rat somewhere to bask. In a world where the dark isn't just absence of light, but a physical, clawing presence, the fire is your only star. And still, it's a cruel god. It demands constant attention. If you leave it alone, even briefly, just to go outside and do your business in the snow while crying quietly, it might flicker, gutter, and die. Relighting it? Not fun. No matches. No lighters. Just flint, steel, and the most stressful 5 minutes of your entire short life. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes you try for hours. Sparks fly, but nothing catches. The kindling's damp. The wool's wet. Your soul is broken. You pray to saints. You curse your ancestors. You seriously consider burning part of your own shoe. And yet, when it catches, when the flames curl up, timid and gold and utterly magnificent, it feels like a miracle. Like someone handed you a second chance. Like winter blinked and, for a moment, lost. So yes, fire is temperamental, smoke-filled, inefficient, dangerous. Smoke suffocates your children. Sparks burn your goats. Your house constantly teeters on the edge of combustion. But fire is God, and tonight God is burning. By now you understand that keeping the fire alive is not a hobby. It's not a cozy ritual. It's not mood lighting. It's a night-long, nerve-shredding battle between human desperation and the unrelenting cold of the void. And you're the reluctant guardian of that tiny, flickering flame. Lucky you. You don't just put the fire out and go to bed. That would be suicide. Letting the fire die in the middle of the night means waking up in a block of medieval ice. Your nose frozen to your own breath. Relighting it in the morning? That's assuming you wake up. So instead, you learn the sacred, smoky art of fire banking, the peasant's version of saving for retirement. Except instead of coins, you're saving embers, and instead of dying poor, you're dying cold. The process? Simple on paper. You wait until the fire's down to glowing coals. Then you bury those coals under a thick layer of ash. Not too much, not too little, just enough to insulate the embers and keep them alive, like a smothered secret you hope no one finds out. Because if the embers go out, you go out. Everyone in the family has an opinion on how to do it properly. Your grandfather swears the key is dry ash and patience. Your mother says you need a pinch of damp straw for texture. Your uncle insists on poking it with a stick 3 times while swearing at the wind. You just want to sleep. But sleep is a luxury. Fire banking isn't exact science. It's ancestral sorcery. Done right, you'll wake up to a glowing lump that reignites with a few twigs and a prayer. Done wrong, you'll wake up to nothing but regret, recrimination, and a cold so deep it changes who you are at the cellular level. So you take turns checking the fire through the night. You, your siblings, your grandmother with joints made of twigs, all creeping toward the hearth at some cursed hour, prodding the mound, whispering to it, listening like it might whisper back. Sometimes it crackles reassuringly. Sometimes it's quiet, too quiet, and then the panic sets in. You peel back the ash like a surgeon. You see nothing. You poke. Still nothing. You blow gently, desperately, offering up your last warm breath like a sacrifice. A faint glow flickers. You scream inside with joy. You feed it twigs, whisper compliments, promise your firstborn. You're a fire whisperer. You're a god of coals. And yet, there are nights it all goes wrong. A gust of wind through a drafty wall. A misstep. A sleepy child accidentally dumps the ashes. A goat, uninvited as always, kicks the hearth and walks away like it owns the place. The fire dies. The room turns into a tomb. And you're the one who has to tell your father. But the nights it works, oh, the triumph. You wake up before dawn, lift the ash gently, and there it is, a pulsing ember, red as survival. You feed it. You nurture it. You breathe life into it. You become Prometheus with bedhead. Because this isn't just warmth. It's not just fire. It's proof you made it through the night. In the modern world, personal space is a right. In the medieval winter, It's a luxury for corpses. When the fire flickers low, the frost creeps in, and your breath starts forming icicles mid-sentence. There's only one strategy left to keep warm, and it's not glamorous. It's not cute. It's not Instagrammable. It's clumped together like half-frozen sardines and pray for body heat. That's right. It's medieval cuddle time, and not the romantic candlelit kind. We're talking full-contact survival snuggling, involving your parents, your cousins, your neighbors, that one guy who just sort of showed up last week and hasn't left, and inevitably a chicken or two. You don't sleep in beds so much as form human lasagna. Layers upon layers. Elders on the inside. Children squeezed between adults. That weird uncle who farts in his sleep? Edge position. He earned it. Whoever's strongest or has the most insulation, read. Fat and furs gets placed on the outer layer, like a human wall against the cold. The goal is simple. No exposed flesh, no air gaps, no frostbite. It's less family gathering and more tactical human insulation. And if you're lucky, truly blessed, the dog wedges itself into the center, warming 3 people at once and becoming the MVP of the night. But it's not all snuggles and safety. It's uncomfortable. People snore. Someone always kicks in their sleep. Someone always shifts and accidentally unseals the heat dome, sending a freezing gust of death through the pile. There are no apologies, only glares, whispered curses, and silent suffering until warmth returns. And the smell? Legendary. You've got unwashed humans, damp wool, goat breath, and at least one child with a suspiciously full diaper. Add in the shared bedding, probably a flattened hay sack that hasn't been cleaned since midsummer. And congratulations, you've invented the first known form of biological warfare. Still, no one complains, because the alternative is worse. Alone means cold. Cold means stillness. Stillness means death. So you shuffle in, press your cheek to Aunt Hilda's shoulder, and accept the fact that someone's foot is under your thigh and you'll never know whose it was. Sometimes you even share dreams, which is less magical and more a side effect of carbon monoxide exposure from the hearth. But it adds to the charm if you live to remember it. Children are wrapped so tightly in layers of cloth they look like overstuffed cabbages. They don't move. They just vibrate slightly from the combined shivering. Grandparents lie still, murmuring prayers. Parents snore out of sheer exhaustion. Everyone is touching everyone else. It's like being back in the womb, only colder and significantly more crowded. You learn to fall asleep in a tangle of elbows, wool, and livestock. You wake up damp, itchy, and slightly disoriented. But if you're still warm, even a little, that means the system worked. So next time you complain about someone hogging the blanket, remember, medieval peasants didn't have blankets. They had each other, and they were holding on for dear life. Let's address the hoofed, bearded, slightly unhinged reality of medieval winter. You don't just live with your family. You live with your animals. And not metaphorically, literally, in the same room, in the same space, breathing the same air, sharing the same body heat, and occasionally the same bedding. Why? Because animals are warm, and warm is life. In a perfect world, your cow would stay outside in the barn. But this isn't a perfect world. This is February. Your walls are made of poop, and your only source of consistent warmth weighs 200 kilos and moos at sunrise. So you invite her in, not because you want to, but because it's her or hypothermia, and she's not alone. The goats come too. So do the pigs, the chickens, and maybe even a duck if it was fast enough. Your home becomes a barn with ambitions, a living furnace powered by fur, feathers, and farts. The goat, of course, is the ringleader. Goats are not guests. Goats are anarchists. They don't ask. They take. They chew things, cords, bedding your dignity. They climb on furniture. They knock over pots. They stare at you while you sleep, chewing slowly, like they know something you don't. You may think you have boundaries. You don't. The goat sleeps where it wants. Sometimes at your feet. Sometimes on your feet. Sometimes directly on top of your child, who now has a small hoof print where personality development should be. The goat doesn't care. The goat is warm. And in this house, that makes it royalty. The cow lies against the wall like a living radiator, steaming gently, emitting deep sighs and the occasional low moo of judgment. The pig wedges itself somewhere near the hearth, belly up, snoring like it pays rent. The chickens? They perch anywhere, beams, buckets, heads. They are unpredictable, chaotic feathered thermometers. And all of them, every single one, have absolutely no shame. They sleep when they want. They wake when they want. They defecate where they stand. You step in it. You curse. You clean it. Then it happens again. This is not a glitch. This is the system. Of course, the smell is apocalyptic. A stew of wet wool, wood smoke, sweat, hay mud, and something deeply barnyard that defies labeling. But you don't complain, because that cow's body heat might be the only thing between you and waking up crispy with frost. Some peasants build crude dividers, wooden rails or ropes to keep the animals in their space. This is adorable. The animals ignore it. The goat jumps over. The pig walks through. The chickens fly. Soon the barrier is trampled, chewed, and used as a bed by a very satisfied duck. Nice try. And yet, despite the chaos, it works. The house is warmer. The air is thicker, unfortunately, but you breathe a little easier. You sleep a little longer. You wake up with feeling in your toes. And that's worth every stomped foot and chewed blanket. You don't live in a house anymore. You live in a low-budget, high-stakes petting zoo. One where the animals are not tame, the rules are not clear, and the goat is probably in charge. But it's warm, and in winter, warm wins. If you think fashion is about looking good, you clearly haven't tried not dying in a hut full of livestock while the wind screams through your walls like a banshee with respiratory issues. In medieval winter, fashion wasn't a statement. It was a strategy, and the strategy was simple. Put on everything you own and never, ever take it off. No one cared about trends. No one cared about matching. No one even cared about sizes. If it fit over your head or legs, it went on. If it didn't fit, you stretched it, tied it, or wore it sideways. Congratulations, you're warm. Or at least less likely to wake up blue. Let's build your outfit together. Start with a linen undertunic, scratchy, damp, and definitely not clean. Over that, a wool tunic, thicker, itchy, smells like every emotion you've ever had in it. Then another wool tunic. Then a cloak. Then a second cloak. Then a goat skin. Then someone else's goat skin, borrowed and never returned. You are now a human onion of sadness and insulation. Trousers are optional, but highly encouraged. Mostly because the alternative is frostbitten thighs and a reputation you'll never live down to the market. You wrap your legs in cloth strips, stuff your feet in rough leather boots, if you're lucky, or tie old rags around your toes and shove them into wooden clogs that double as torture devices. No gloves? Use sleeves. No hut? Wrap your head in a scarf. No scarf? Use a rag. No dogs? Use a small child. Medieval layering was less about comfort and more about acquisition. If you could strap it to your body and it didn't catch fire, it was fair game. Did you wash these clothes? Of course not. Are you insane? Taking your layers off to wash them means exposure. Exposure means death. You'd rather smell like a fermented sheep than risk undressing in a room where the water bucket is frozen solid. And here's the thing, the dirt helps. Over time, your clothes become stiff with smoke, sweat, grease, and mystery substances. You form a crust. This crust is not shameful. This crust is thermal protection. You have invented peasant Gore-Tex. It's disgusting. It's glorious. It works. Sure, you smell like someone boiled an old carpet in goat milk. But you're alive. You are a filthy, shivering miracle wrapped in 30 pounds of damp wool and defiance. Children? Same deal. You wrap them in anything, blankets, cloaks, extra tunics. Half of a curtain. They waddle around like overstuffed potatoes, arms out, eyes wide, peeking over a scarf tied, so tight it doubles as a breathing challenge. And if you have to leave the house, say to chop wood, check on the cow, or scream into the snow, you just add more layers. Gloves over rags. A fur hood over your scarf. Another pair of pants over your first. By the end, you're basically an ambulatory bundle of fabric with eye holes. This isn't fashion. This is textile warfare. You're not dressing for success. You're dressing for survival. You don't need to turn heads. You need to keep yours attached. So yes, you look like a pile of laundry with depression. You move like a sleep-deprived marshmallow. You smell like an apocalypse in wolf form. But you're warm, and that's what counts. Let's clear something up. You are filthy and not in a poetic, post-apocalyptic, look how raw and real I am way. No, you are dirty in a way that transcends adjectives. You are one with the grime. You don't just live in dirt. You wear it, breathe it, and depend on it. Because in a medieval winter, cleanliness is not next to godliness. Cleanliness is next to hypothermia. It starts innocently enough. You've been wearing the same tunic for 3 weeks. It's a little smoky, a little stiff. But hey, it's warm, right? Then another week passes. The fabric darkens. Cracks form in the grease. The sleeves develop their own weather systems. Someone asks what color your shirt used to be, and you no longer remember. And then you realize something incredible. You're not cold anymore. Why? Because the dirt has formed a barrier. An insulating, odoriferous, semi-biological barrier that seals in warmth and repels both water and society. You've created organic armor, built from sweat, soot, oil, and layers of life experience. It's disgusting. It's effective. It's yours. Laundry, meanwhile, is a fantasy. To wash your clothes in winter, you'd have to drag them to a frozen stream, break the ice, soak your hands until your bones scream, scrub with homemade soap if you're rich, and then wait 2 days for them to dry stiff as boards. And during those 2 days, you're naked. No thanks. Better to let the layers accumulate. It's not that medieval peasants didn't understand hygiene. They just understood priorities. Smelling like a smokehouse in a pigsty is a small price to pay when the alternative is freezing to death because your cloak is hanging on a line somewhere, icicles forming on the armpits. And it's not just your clothes. Your skin? Same deal. Bathing in winter is optional. Ice baths might be fashionable now, but in the Middle Ages, they were just called a bad idea. You don't strip down unless the fire is roaring, the door is barricaded, and someone is watching for sudden drafts. And even then, you mostly just wipe the obvious parts with a damp rag and a silent prayer. Some peasants even believed that washing too often made you sick. And you know what? They weren't entirely wrong. You strip off your protective crust in the middle of January, you will get sick. Probably while shivering in your one wet shirt, regretting every life choice that brought you here. So the grime stays. It builds. It evolves. It tells a story. That dark stain, that's from a hearth when a pig kicked the pot. That crust, that's 6 weeks of fireplace ash, cow grease, and hope. That smell, that's survival. You stop noticing after a while. Everyone smells. The house smells. The air smells. Smell is relative. What matters is warmth. You're no longer just a peasant. You are a thermal organism encased in bioinsulation. And the only thing colder than your winter is the judgment of history students reading this centuries later. Let's talk about your bed, or, to be more accurate, the scratchy pile of suffering you call a mattress. Forget everything you know about comfort. There is no plushness here. No bones. No orthopedic support. Just straw. Moldy, itchy, partially decomposed straw stuffed into a sack that smells like the inside of a cow in the past 3 weeks of your life. Your mattress isn't a friend. It isn't a retreat. It's a biological landmine, and you sleep on it only because the floor is worse. It starts with good intentions. You gather fresh straw or rushes, spread them in a sack made of linen or burlap. Maybe throw in a handful of herbs like lavender or thyme if you're fancy, or pretending to be. It smells nice for about a day. Then the straw flattens. Then it starts moving. Not by itself, of course. It's the passengers. Fleas, lice, mites, things that have legs, things that lay eggs. Congratulations, your bed is now a thriving ecosystem. Every time you lie down, it crackles. You shift to get comfortable, and it pokes you in the ribs. You roll over, and you discover a damp spot that shouldn't be there. The pillow, if it exists, it's a wadded up cloak. If not, it's your arm, or maybe your child. Who needs vertebrae anyway? And don't forget the smell. Over time, the mattress absorbs everything. Smoke, sweat, spilled broth, goat drool, tears. You could carbon date your bed based on its odor alone. Historians 500 years from now will find the straw heap and immediately understand the phrase human suffering. And you can't even clean it properly. You can replace the straw if you have enough to spare, which you probably don't. And if you're willing to carry it in freezing temperatures from wherever it's being stored in the dark, mouse-infested corner of your collapsing barn. So, more likely, you just throw a new layer of straw on top. The old stuff stays. Composting, basically. And yet it insulates. Barely. It lifts you a few inches off the frozen, cursed ground. It shares warmth, traps body heat, and gives fleas somewhere to hang out that isn't directly on your skin for a few seconds. And if you're lucky, you've jammed your bed up next to the hearth, close enough to feel the fire, but not so close it bursts into flames. Probably. And still, you dream. Not of sunshine and spring, no. You dream of a mattress that doesn't bite you back. One that doesn't crunch when you roll over. One where you don't wake up and spend 10 minutes wondering if that sharp thing under your spine is a chicken bone, a stick, or a message from God. But for now, you lie still. You try not to scratch. You try not to breathe too deeply. You wrap your cloak tighter and hope you can sleep before the mice get bold. Because this isn't rest. This is the nightly negotiation with medieval gravity. And your mattress? It hates you, but at least it's not the floor. There comes a moment, sometime between your third frostbitten toe and the 50th howling gust of wind blasting through your dinner, when you realize something awful. You're going to have to fix your house again. From the inside, while living in it, during a blizzard. Because when your walls are made of mud and manure and prayers, they don't stay fixed. They weep. They crumble. They open up in new and exciting ways every time the temperature drops. You plug one hole, and 3 more appear like you're living in a particularly sad game of medieval whack-a-draft. It starts with the sound, a whistle, then a soft, cold finger of air touches the back of your neck like winter itself just said, hey. You turn. You see it, a fresh gap in the daub, where wind and snow now enter your home without knocking. So you gather your tools. And by tools, we mean a handful of straw, a lump of wet clay, a piece of sheep's wool, and maybe a scrap of old underpants. That's your toolkit. That's your armor. That's your defense against the universe. You kneel down next to the wall, knees in cold mud, breath fogging the air, holding a ball of animal hair and hope. And then you stuff. You jab straw into the gap. You smear mud with your bare hands. You mutter things under your breath that would make a priest blush. You slap the wall like it insulted your mother. And then you wait. Maybe it holds. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe in 2 hours the patch falls out and hits your child on the head. Maybe a rat pulls it loose to make itself a luxury nest. Maybe the goat eats it. All equally possible, all equally infuriating. And it's not just the walls. The roof leaks, too, constantly. Drip, 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 into the fire, onto your bedding, into your shoes. You try plugging the holes with rags. You nail up old bits of cloth. You even try moss like a forest was trying to make peace with nature. Nature is not impressed. Doors? If you have one, it's warped. The hinges scream. The wind bends it open like it's not even trying. You jam furniture in front of it. The wind laughs. You pray. The wind knocks again. Windows? You mean holes, covered in stretched animal stomachs or planks of wood, or at this point, your own shirt. Sometimes the covers freeze shut. Sometimes they flap wildly like they're trying to escape. Either way, cold is coming in, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. But you keep trying, because you have no choice. You fix and patch and plug, over and over, like a very sad medieval plumber with no pipes and no hope. And each time you finish a repair, you sit down, shivering, staring at the wall, and dare the storm to try again. It always does, but so do you, because this isn't just your house, it's your battlefield. And you're not going down without one more handful of manure. There are moments in life that test the soul. Standing barefoot in the snow, watching your roof collapse mid-dinner, realizing your last potato has frozen from the inside out. And then there's the 3 a.m. fire watch with the goat. It's your turn. Of course it is. You were warm, asleep, dreaming of food that wasn't gray. But now someone's elbowed you in the ribs and muttered, "Your shift." No questions, no protests. You rise from the communal bed pile like a cursed mummy, groaning, wrapped in so many layers you forget what knees are. The house is dark. The fire? A few sad, dying embers blinking up at you like, "Well, got anything for us, genius?" You shuffle over, trip on a boot, curse quietly, and begin the ritual. Stir the coals, blow gently, add twigs, pray nothing's damp, and try to breathe without inhaling half the hearth. And that's when you hear it. Talp, chew, shuffle. The goat is awake. Of course she is. She knows it's your shift. She's watching, judging, waiting. She's already near the fire, closer than you, and you swear she's smirking. One leg folded beneath her like she owns the hearth, chewing on something she definitely shouldn't have. A rag? A piece of the door? Last week's tax records? Doesn't matter. You light the fire. She scoots closer. You reach for more wood. She headbutts your knee. You shift the pot hanging above the flame. She tries to climb into it. You sit down, exhausted, freezing, your cloak hiked over your face to trap breath warmth. She steps on your foot, stares directly into your soul, belches, and continues chewing. You're not a person right now. You are a designated warmth technician, doomed to stare at flickering coals while livestock mocks your pain. Everyone else is asleep, blissfully tangled in lice-ridden straw, drooling in a shared hay, snoring like it's a professional competition. You are the guardian of the sacred ember, and you are alone. Except for the goat, who is always here, who will outlive you. Every time the fire sputters, your heart drops. You blow until your lips go numb. Add wood. Add more wood. Panic when you realize you're almost out. Consider burning a stool. Briefly eye the goat. You wouldn't, of course, but she notices and moves further away. Eventually, maybe an hour in, the fire stabilizes. You sit back. Your legs are stiff. Your cloak has soaked up the moisture from the floor. The room is quiet now, save for the crackle of the flame, the distant creaking of the roof beams, and the steady chewing of the eternal goat. You look at her. She looks at you. And in that moment, something ancient and unspoken passes between you. Suffering recognizes suffering, but only one of you gets to go back to sleep. And it's not you. You probably don't think much about breathing. It just happens. In, out. All day. All night. No big deal. Until winter in a medieval hovel turns your lungs into frozen balloons filled with smoke and regret, and suddenly breathing becomes a full-time job. A dangerous one. Here's the problem. The air inside your home? It's not air. It's a toxic blend of fire smoke, wet goat stench, expired turnip fumes, and pure, uncut January. Every breath you take is either too cold, too damp, too smoky, or all three. And each one threatens to rip your throat in half and send you into a 2-week coughing spiral that ends with a priest and a shovel. So like everything else in your life, you adapt. You learn the ancient technique of not breathing wrong. Step 1, never open your mouth. Breathing through your mouth is a death sentence. That air is too cold, too raw, too direct. It hits your chest like an icy spear and plants pneumonia like it's sowing seeds for spring. You'll feel it instantly. A stab in your ribs, a scratch in your throat, a future of wheezing by candlelight. So you keep your mouth closed. Always. Even in sleep. Especially in sleep. You learn to snore through your nose like a disciplined war veteran. Step 2, slow, shallow breaths. You're not in yoga class. You're just trying to survive the night without freezing your alveoli. Big, deep breaths might feel satisfying, but they're also a one-way ticket to the churchyard. You breathe lightly, cautiously, like the air might bite. Step 3, cover your face. With what? Anything. A corner of your cloak, a scrap of wool, a child's sock if you're desperate. Anything to trap just a whisper of warmth and moisture near your nostrils. Sure, by morning it'll be stiff with ice and smell like shame. But you'll be alive. Some folks wrap scars around their heads so tightly they look like confused mummies. Others use fur. Some just bury their faces in their straw bedding and hope for the best. And a day without stepping on a mouse. And let's be honest, sometimes it doesn't work. You wake up coughing, eyes watering, your throat sandpapered by the night air. Your chest rattles, your nose runs. Your grandmother eyes you from the fire and mutters something about demons in your lungs. You get onion tea and a stern look. No sympathy, just onions and wool. Children learn early. You scold your kids for panting indoors like they've just outrun the harvest. Through the nose, you hiss. Like a civilized person. They ignore you for 2 winters. Then they wake up coughing one night and suddenly become very interested in nasal technique. It's not elegant. It's not romantic. No one's composing ballads about the breathing heroes of '82. But it works. One slow breath at a time. Through cloth and smoke and fear, you keep going. Because in the war against winter, even breathing is resistance. In most eras of history, eating before bed is discouraged. Bad for digestion. They say, you'll have weird dreams. Or your waistline, darling. In medieval winter, eat. Eat everything. Eat like your internal furnace depends on it, because it does. Welcome to peasant thermodynamics. Calories equal heat. Fat equals warmth. That bubbling pot of goat fat and turnip stew you force down at sundown, that's not just dinner. That's your survival strategy. You see, when the sun goes down and the fire starts to sputter and the walls of your house are vibrating with the angry screams of January, your only hope is your own digestive system. Your stomach becomes the hearth. Your intestines, the kindling. Your body burns whatever it can to keep the core temperature up. So you feed it. You feed it well. And by well, we mean heavily. You don't nibble. You load up. The meal isn't glamorous. It's not seasoned. It's not even visually distinct. Most winter food is a beige sludge, thick barley porridge, mashed roots, sour cabbage, mystery meats boiled into submission. It sits in your belly like a hot rock of hope. And that's the goal. Sometimes it's soup. Sometimes it's stew. Sometimes it's yesterday's soup, reheated with newer, sadder cabbage. You dunk crusts of black bread into it until they disintegrate, and you spoon the whole mess into your mouth like a soldier going into battle. Chew, optional. Heat, essential. If you're lucky, truly, cosmically blessed, there's fat in it. Maybe a scrap of bacon or a ribbon of lard, or a piece of meat with more gristle than muscle. You don't ask questions. You don't look directly at it. You eat it and feel your body thank you silently with a single extra degree of warmth in your feet. Children get force-fed. "I'm not hungry," says little Thomas. You don't respond. You just shove another spoonful in. Turnips don't care if you're full. You're going to eat until you can't stand up, and then you'll lie down and radiate warmth like a well-fed piglet. That's the plan. Of course, the dreams come. Heavy food plus stress plus smoke inhalation equals spectacular hallucinations. You dream of floating sheep, screaming chickens, endless stairs made of cabbage. But you wake up and you're not frozen. And that's the point. Some peasants even plan their winter meals around this science. The thicker, the slower to digest, the better. Gruel that sits like cement? Perfect. Lentils that turn into paste? Ideal. Fatback stew that smells like a barn and burns your throat? Medicinal. And it's not just warmth. It's comfort. After a day of hauling wood, fixing leaks, fighting off goats, and watching your breath fog the inside of your eyelids, that warm bowl is a hug from the inside. It's the one kindness the universe offers you before another night of collective, lice-infested unconsciousness. You eat. You lie down. Your belly gurgles. Your body gets to work. Because in the end, you're not digesting dinner. You're fighting winter one bite at a time. It's bedtime. The fire's down to embers. The wind's doing its nightly impersonation of a banshee outside, and your blanket situation is basically one itchy cloak and a cousin. You are not ready to sleep. But wait, what's that? A miracle. A plan. A heated rock. Yes, a rock. A big, flat, no-nonsense chunk of stone. Tonight, that rock is your best friend, your personal sun, your smoldering companion in this icy hellscape. Let's walk through the process, shall we? Step 1. Pick a rock. Not too big. You're not trying to recreate a landslide. Not too small. It should have enough thermal mass, a term peasants absolutely did not use, but absolutely understood. You toss it into the fire an hour before bed and let it soak up every last shred of heat like it's auditioning for sainthood. Step 2. Retrieval. This task usually falls to the person who made the fewest contributions to dinner or lost the most recent family argument. They fish the rock out of the flames using metal tongs if you're lucky, or 2 sticks and deep. Misplaced confidence if you're not. There is much screaming. The smell of singed wool fills the air. Step 3. The wrapping. You take that blisteringly hot rock and swaddle it. First in rags, then in a thicker layer like an old cloak, and sometimes a small basket or clay pot if you're fancy or trying to avoid burning a hole in the floor. This is your heating device. Your rustic hot water bottle. Your angry, glowing teddy bear. Step 4. Placement. You slip the wrapped rock into bed before you get in, usually near your feet or the middle of the sleeping pile. Instantly, everything around it becomes bearable. The straw hisses. The lice retreat. Your toes relax for the first time in hours. Of course, there are risks. If you underwrap it, you burn yourself. If you overwrap it, you smother the heat and wake up shivering with a 15-pound disappointment at your feet. If the rock cracks from sudden cold or still has a coal embedded in it, congratulations. Your bed is now on fire. Yes, this has happened. Yes, that's why you always have a backup bucket of dirt nearby. No one wants to explain to the priest that you burned down your hut trying to cuddle granite. But when it works, when you've nailed the temperature, the wrapping, and the placement, it's magic. Pure, medieval, volcanic magic. You huddle near it like a moth, grateful for this dumb, perfect rock. The warmth seeps into your bones. You feel your shoulders loosen. For the first time all day, you remember what it's like to not be clenching everything all the time. And then your cousin rolls over and steals the rock. So you wrestle in silence, gritting your teeth, both of you too frozen to fully commit to violence. Eventually, the rock settles in the middle, shared, sullen, glowing faintly, judging you both. And you fall asleep like that. Because in a medieval winter, love comes in many forms. A hot bowl of stew, a goat who hasn't eaten your blanket yet, and a rock in your bed that didn't kill you. You might think medieval peasants were too cold, tired, and covered in smoke to care about status. And you'd be wrong, because in the brutal, frozen microcosm of the one-room hut, where you slept said everything about who you were. And nothing screamed status louder than a prime spot by the fire. That fire, sputtering, smoky, temperamental, was the heart of the home. It cooked your food. It kept your goats from freezing. It drove out fleas, mostly, and it was the only thing standing between you and waking up with icicles dangling from your ears. So, naturally, everyone wanted to be near it. But space was limited, and embers burned. So what developed over time was a delicately balanced sleep caste system, where position determined privilege and warmth meant power. The inner circle belonged to the vulnerables. Infants, the elderly, the sick, and anyone with visible frostbite or a dramatic cough. They got the front row seats at the Flame concert, wrapped like burritos, placed strategically to soak up the most warmth and, hopefully, not burst into flames. Next ring out, the guardians. Parents, older kids, able-bodied folks. Close enough to be warm, but also responsible for making sure toddlers didn't crawl into the fire and livestock didn't knock the kettle into someone's face. You were warm, yes, but also on duty. Further out were the semi-frozen masses, distant cousins, guests, people who had annoyed someone during the day, and that one uncle who always brought up politics. Their side of the room was a few degrees above death, warmed mostly by body heat, dreams, and the occasional drifting ember. At the very edge, the exiles. You forgot to feed the goat. You slept near the door. You told a bad joke at dinner. You're facing the wall tonight. You were the last one to get home from chopping wood. Hope you like sleeping next to the draft hole. Enjoy the wind. But here's the thing. Position wasn't just about need. It was about favor. The person who handed out sleeping spots held quiet authority. Was it the matriarch? The fire watcher? The goat? Hard to say, but someone decided who got the warmth, and you played nice with them or froze. Of course, sleeping near the fire came with risks. Embers popped. Sparks flew. Cloaks caught. More than one peasant woke up smoldering or with a perfectly circular hole singed into their blanket or their thigh. Still, people fought for those spots. Passive-aggressively, of course. You accidentally lay your blanket closer to the hearth. You scoot an inch every time someone shifts. You build a wall of shoes and declare your side. Fireside politics were real and brutal. Even animals joined the hierarchy. The family dog, prime fire spot, curled up like a toasted pastry. The chickens, roosting near the ashes. The cat, practically inside the hearth. You, fourth row, behind a pig. But somehow it worked. Warmth radiated outward. Bodies shifted in sleep. The room breathed like a giant, shivering organism. And everyone knew, you wake up near the fire, you're somebody. You mattered. You made it. You were a survivor. So if you ever time travel and find yourself in a medieval hut on a snowy night, do yourself a favor. Bring wood. Compliment the stew. Pet the goat. And angle for the fire. Forget the lone hero trope. In a medieval winter, the lone hero is frozen solid by epiphany and buried by Candlemas. Survival isn't about strength. It's about cooperation, the messy, loud, mildly resentful kind. Because no one survives winter alone. Not even you. You live in a village. A real one. Not a postcard version with quaint thatch and happy pigs. A mud-slushed cluster of human desperation, smoke, noise, and stubborn hope. Your walls might barely stand, your food stores might be dwindling, but your neighbors? They're everything. You learn the rhythm early. When old Branca's chimney doesn't smoke by mid-morning, someone knocks. Not because they like her, Branca hasn't said a nice word since 1323, but because you check. Because one day it'll be your chimney that goes cold, and someone needs to come looking. The strongest backs chop wood for those who can't. Kids deliver embers wrapped in cloth when a hearth dies. Families crowd together on the coldest nights. Not because they want to, privacy is a myth, but because 5 people generate more heat than 2, and everyone knows it. Even grudges hibernate. That man who stole your chicken in summer? Now he's knocking, frozen, teeth clattering like castanets. You glare. You let him in. You curse under your breath. Then you throw him a blanket. Because it's what we do. When food runs low, the village shares, miserably, begrudgingly, and only after everyone's sure the others are just as hungry. You bring a turnip. They bring a barley cake. Someone finds a pickled mystery vegetable from 3 autumns ago. It smells like sin. You eat it anyway. You survive. The old women watch from the corners, the memory keepers, the winter mathematicians. They know who's eaten, who hasn't, who's coughing, who's not. They hand out advice like curses, but every word is weighted in truth. If she tells you to sleep next to your uncle tonight because his cough is getting worse, you do it because she knows. She's seen 47 winters and still has all her toes. Even children pull their weight. They gather sticks. They chase chickens back indoors. They tattle when someone's fire goes out. And yes, that's a good thing. Tattling saves lives here. No one likes asking for help. Everyone does it anyway. And no one is turned away. Not really. Not when the alternative is burying another frozen neighbor by spring. Because winter doesn't care about your pride. It doesn't care about land disputes or whose goat ate whose hat. It wants you dead. And the only way to fight back is together. In damp, overcrowded huts, under shared blankets, eating shared soup, breathing shared smoke. So you survive. Not with strength. Not with courage. But with company. One body. One ember. One borrowed turnip at a time. Eventually, you run out of options. The fire is low. The wind is high. The food is gone. Your fingers are cracked. Your feet have gone numb again, or maybe they've left you entirely, like roommates who couldn't take it anymore. You've patched every hole in the wall with cloth, clay, and whatever emotional stability you had left. And now you lie there, in the dark, in the cold, and you pray. Because faith in winter is not ceremonial. It's not tidy. It's not Sunday best hymns and golden chalices. It's muttering into your straw bedding, half frozen and smoke-choked, begging whatever holy force might be listening to please let the fire stay lit just a few more hours. You don't ask for much. No riches, no miracles, just warmth, just survival, just the chance to wake up one more time and try again. You pray to St. Nicholas, not for gifts, but for a roof that holds through the night. You whisper to St. Blaise because your lungs rattle like someone shaking pebbles in a jug. You cross yourself 3 times, then again, just in case. Your grandmother lights a candle, the good one. The one she's kept hidden in a cloth pouch for years. It flickers beside the hearth like a tiny, sacred ember. The last luxury between your family and the frost outside clawing at the walls. The candle doesn't judge. It just burns. Sometimes, people make deals with God. Spare my child, and I'll fast all of Lent. Let us make it through, and I'll give up wine forever. A lie, but an honest one. Bargains made in smoke and shivers. Faith distilled into trade. Other times, it's not even prayer. It's just a look, A shared glance between mother and son. A squeeze of the hand. A kiss on a fevered forehead. These are prayers, too, spoken without words, offered to the darkness. And for some, this is the end. The candle burns low. The fire flickers. The hut groans in the wind. A name is whispered for the last time. And the silence that follows is not cruel. It's just winter, doing what it does. But sometimes the ember survives. The wind dies. The frost retreats just a little. And you wake up, breath steaming in the morning air. Toes intact. A thin beam of daylight slipping through a gap in the roof. The candle is gone, but you are still here. And you thank whoever listened. Because in medieval winter, faith isn't about salvation. It's about one more breath. When you think of medieval peasants, you probably imagine mud, misery, frostbite, and maybe a goat chewing on someone's sleeve. And you're not wrong. But buried beneath the straw and soot and silent suffering is something much greater. A legacy of endurance, stitched into the frozen seams of history by people who should have died, but didn't. Because they weren't just poor. They weren't just cold. They were relentlessly alive. Every ember they protected, every blanket they patched, every root they dug from frozen ground and turned into something vaguely edible. It all built the bridge that led to us. We sit in heated rooms now, wrapped in fleece, sipping tea while our phones charge. But that warmth, that comfort, that ability to say, ugh, it's chilly, and just turn a dial, that is their gift. They fought with what they had, gnarled hands, hay-filled shoes, smoke-thick lungs, and passed forward something incredibly rare. Continuity. A line. A heartbeat. From one winter to the next. One generation to the next. They taught us in quiet ways what it means to endure. To patch the wall again. To share your last potato. To check if Branca's chimney is still smoking. To hold on to each other when the night has teeth. The world they lived in didn't reward endurance. It didn't write poems for it. No medals, no monuments. Just one more sunrise and the unglamorous miracle of being alive to see it. And they did it not for glory, but so that someone, maybe not even themselves, would live long enough to plan in spring. So tonight, if you're warm, if you're fed, if your blanket doesn't crawl, maybe look up just for a moment and whisper thanks to the cold ones. The ones who didn't give up. The ones who kept the ember alive. Because you're part of their story, one stubborn breath at a time. She was born Maria Antonia Josepha Johanna, the 15th child of Empress Maria Theresa of Austria and Emperor Francis I. One more archduchess in a house of power and protocol. Vienna did not tremble at her birth. The empire had daughters to spare. But she was pretty, not brilliant, not philosophical, not dangerously political like some of her older siblings, but lovely in that soft, effortless way that made others want to decorate her, like a porcelain figure in a velvet box. Blue-eyed, blonde-haired, charming when she remembered to be. And for a court obsessed with image, that was enough. At 13, her portrait was sent to Versailles, smiling, innocent, framed in ribbons and rose-colored optimism. France, still licking its wounds from wars with Britain and financial scandal, needed a symbol of renewed alliance with Austria. And Maria Antonia, too young to know the cost of symbolism, was chosen. She was stripped of her Austrian name at the border, along with every last stitch of her homeland. Even her dog was taken. In its place, she was given a new name, a new wardrobe, and a new destiny. Marie Antoinette. She was 14 when she married the Dauphin of France, a boy named Louis Auguste. Quiet, awkward, more fond of locks and hunting than of ruling or romance. Versailles welcomed her with forced smiles and veiled contempt. She was the foreign bride, the Austrian spy, the outsider in a palace where everything, from how you walked to how you sneezed, was rigidly ranked and judged. She was placed in a golden cage and told to sing. And she tried. For a time, she tried. She learned French manners, adopted French fashion, and played the part of the docile Dauphine. But inside the corridors of Versailles, her every mistake was noted, every stumble magnified. She was too frivolous, too distant, too cheerful, too foreign, too everything. The people of France didn't know her yet, but already they were waiting, watching, whispering. She had no idea that the crown she wore so lightly would one day become a blade. She was 19 when the crown touched her head, and nothing about her felt ready. Louis XV, the old king, had died of smallpox, his bloated body taken away as quietly as court etiquette allowed. The air at Versailles changed overnight. Grief was replaced by hunger, for status, for power, for favor under the new king. And the new king was a boy. Her shy, lumbering, indecisive husband, now Louis XVI. He didn't know how to rule. She didn't know how to reign. And yet here they were, king and queen of France, the most glittering monarchy in Europe, bound not by love, not even by confidence, but by inheritance, expectation, and centuries of brittle ceremony. Their marriage, still unconsummated after years, was a courtly joke. Pamphlets whispered it. Courtiers gossiped in gold-laced corners. The queen couldn't please the king. The king couldn't perform. The line of Bourbon hung in a state of farce. And Marie, barely more than a girl, felt the heat of it. The watchful eyes, the side glances, the acid-tipped fan language of the women who never quite accepted her. She was queen of France, and yet powerless to shape even the intimacy of her own bed. So she turned elsewhere, to music, to parties, to costumes, to theater, to hair that stretched toward the ceiling and jewelry that could blind. She danced at masked balls and gambled in salons. She built fantasy cottages where she played at being a milkmaid, dressed in silk. She laughed too loudly. She spent too freely. She forgot or never truly learned what the people beyond the palace were living through. But she wasn't cruel. She wasn't calculating. She was simply unmoored, floating inside a world of mirrors and marble where reality came filtered through silk curtains and layers of powder protocol. Her letters home were filled with loneliness, frustration, longing to be a good wife, a good queen, but she had no tools, no guidance, and no real allies. And all the while, outside the palace walls, France was beginning to change. Wheat prices were rising. Families were starving. Revolution was not yet a word on anyone's tongue, but the air was thick with discontent. Marie Antoinette would come to symbolize everything they hated. But not yet. For now, she was the virgin queen, childless, aimless, adored by some, ridiculed by many, and still pretending that the glitter was gold. By her mid-20s, Marie Antoinette had become the most visible woman in Europe and the most misunderstood. She had, at last, done her duty. After 7 long, humiliating years, the marriage was finally consummated. Relief rippled through Versailles like thunder after a drought. Courtiers whispered, doctors nodded, satirists sharpened their quills anew. In 1778, she gave birth to a daughter, Marie-Therese, not a son, but a child nonetheless. A living heir, a success. The court softened toward her, briefly, but the French people, they were not so forgiving. By now, Marie was not just a queen. She was a symbol, and symbols do not make mistakes. They betray, they offend, they devour. The pamphlets were crueler than ever. They depicted her as a harlot, a foreign agent, a spendthrift vampire draining the lifeblood of France. Her fashions, once the envy of Europe, were now treason in cloth. Her elaborate hairpieces, adorned with model ships, swaying gardens, feathered birds, became grotesque monuments to aristocratic excess. It didn't matter that she wasn't the true source of France's economic collapse. It didn't matter that the national debt had begun before she was born, from wars, from poor harvests, from the sheer rot of feudal mismanagement. She looked guilty, and in an age of famine, Gil had a face powdered in white and laced in pearls. So she did what she had always done. She retreated into performance, into Petit Trianon, the private estate gifted to her by Louis. There, she ruled over a curated world of controlled elegance, far from the stink of politics and public disdain. She built gardens in English style, hosted private plays where she starred as shepherdesses and peasants. She played at simplicity while the real peasants sharpened their hunger into fury. The rumors grew darker. She was sleeping with everyone, or no one. She was manipulating the king, or ignoring him. She was barren. She was dangerous. She was Austrian. Even the famous phrase, "let them eat cake," though never once spoken by her, was assigned to her lips with venomous ease. It didn't matter that she never said it. The world needed her to have said it. Marie Antoinette had become the mirror in which France saw its inequality, its suffering, its humiliation. And mirrors, when cracked, become weapons. She laughed in public, and they called her heartless. She wept in private, and they call her false. She could not win, but she could still try to endure. And for a time, she did, dazzling and damned in equal measure. By the time Marie Antoinette bore a son, Louis Joseph, the Dauphin, in the year 1781, the applause was thunderous, but the relief short-lived. France was bleeding, not from swords, but from numbers. The cost of helping the American colonies win independence from Britain had pushed the treasury deeper into chaos. Decades of royal spending, tax inequality, and a collapsing agricultural system had created a perfect storm of fiscal despair. And while Louis XVI hesitated, Marie sparkled. That was enough. She became the scapegoat in diamonds. Never mind that she hadn't ruled the country. Never mind that she had no formal power over the treasury or the ministers who governed it. Her face was enough. Her gowns were enough. Her name, foreign, glittering, theatrical, was enough. And then came the necklace. It was a piece of royal decadence so obscenely extravagant that its very existence was absurd. 16,000 diamonds, dripping across a weight of gold and silver, meant for a queen of old, Madame du Barry, mistress of the previous king. The jewelers, desperate to recoup their losses after the king's death, tried to sell it to Marie. She refused, repeatedly, but the fraud was already in motion. A con woman, a forged letter, a gullible cardinal, and a scandal that spread like wildfire. Even though Marie Antoinette had nothing to do with it, the public believed she had orchestrated the whole affair. The affair of the diamond necklace wasn't just gossip, it was political gunpowder. It confirmed every suspicion the people had been taught to feel. She was wasteful. She was corrupt. She was the reason they were starving. The truth no longer mattered. France, once enchanted by her charm, was now rabid with hatred. Pamphlets showed her in bed with guards, with women, with demons. They accused her of bleeding the kingdom dry to fill her closets. Even her motherhood was mocked. Her children labeled as bastards of lovers imagined by a furious press. Inside Versailles, she walked more quietly now. Her laughter was more rare. The flamboyant gowns gave way to simpler dresses. She understood, finally, that the crowd outside the gates no longer saw a woman. They saw a fire waiting for a match. And as the treasury failed and bread riots erupted across the country, Marie knew one thing with certainty. The crown had never been hers to wear, but will be hers to answer for. It was July 14th, 1789. The air in Paris was thick, not just with summer heat, but with something more electric, more ancient. Hunger had grown fangs. The price of bread was a death sentence for the poor. The Estates General had convened, then collapsed into chaos. The National Assembly had declared itself the voice of the people. And now, the people themselves were ready to shout. The Bastille, old gray, symbol more than fortress, fell in less than a day. The king's troops hesitated. The guards were overwhelmed. The prison gates swung open, and with them, centuries of royal authority began to crack. Heads were lifted on pikes, arms raised in ragged triumph. A revolution was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. Inside Versailles, they heard it. The king was bewildered. Marie Antoinette was not. She understood what was coming. For years, she had been the ghost in the mirror of France's misery. Now the mirror had shattered, and every shard was aimed at her throat. The crowds didn't just chant against taxes or hunger. They chanted her name, Madame Deficit, the Austrian, the whore. Rumors swelled that she was hoarding grain, plotting to flee, inviting foreign armies to crush the people. The court still danced, still dined, but uneasily. The queen's mask was slipping. She spent less time with courtiers and more with her children. She walked in gardens more than in salons. Her hair grew simpler, her dresses plainer. But it was too late for simplicity. France wanted blood, and it had just tasted its first drops. In October, they came for her. Thousands of women, fishmongers, washerwomen, mothers, marched from Paris to Versailles in the rain, their feet blistered, their faces hard. They wanted bread. They wanted the king in Paris. And they wanted the queen. When the mob stormed the palace, they tore through the halls, screaming for her head. Guards were butchered. Blood stained the marble. Marie fled barefoot through back passages with her children, just ahead of the blades. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She told her ladies to be brave. She stared at death through the keyhole and didn't blink. And the next day, she stood on the palace balcony beside the king, in full view of the mob, holding her children. She curtsied. A strange, terrible silence passed through the crowd. Then the drums started. The royal family was marched back to Paris, surrounded by shouting citizens waving pikes and dragging cannon. Versailles was empty. France had changed, and the queen was now a prisoner in velvet. The palace they gave her was the Tuileries, grand in name, but hollow in safety. No longer monarchs in majesty, Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI became something else, symbols contained. They were watched, followed, measured with every step. What had once been ceremony was now surveillance. The gilding on the mirrors had not yet flaked, but the air had changed. Thick with suspicion, with rot, with the slow, growing scent of revolution turned sour. The court still technically functioned. Ministers still came. Letters were still written. But decisions? Those were made elsewhere now. In clubs, in cafes, on streets, soaked in rhetoric and beer. The people had discovered their voice, and it did not sound like prayer. It sounded like a growl. Marie Antoinette, once a girl surrounded by harpists and lace, now listened at keyholes. She wrote letters in code to her Austrian family. She watched the newspapers for slander. She plotted with diplomats, pleaded with loyal nobles, and made choices with a new clarity. Survival was the only crown left to wear. And she played the role. She walked with dignity. She dressed plainly, spoke softly, refused to hide. But behind every gesture was a calculation. She no longer believed in the safety of palaces or the permanence of power. She believed in escape. The plan came in 1791. A midnight flight, disguised servants, a carriage rattling across France toward the border. If they could reach the loyalist troops stationed at Montmedy, they could regroup, reclaim, reset the chessboard. It failed. A town official, glancing at a coin, recognized the profile of the queen. The royal family was stopped in Versailles and dragged back to Paris in disgrace. The journey back was silent and long, lined with glares and jeers. Marie Antoinette kept her back straight the whole time. She never cried where they could see. But something broke in France that day. Not just royal illusion, but royal trust. Even those who once defended her began to look away. She had tried to flee the nation. Now the nation would try her soul. The monarchy, once a theater of divinity, had become a courtroom, and the people were ready to pass sentence. By the year 1792, Marie Antoinette was no longer a queen, not in title, not in public grace, not even in name. The monarchy had been formally abolished. Louis XVI was stripped of his titles and reduced to citizen Louis Capet. Marie followed suit, though not by choice. In the press, in the streets, she became simply the widow Capet, though her husband still breathed. It was a prophecy spoken in present tense. They were moved to the temple, once a medieval fortress, now a royal tomb in waiting. Guarded by revolutionaries, locked away from the world, they lived in shadow. Meals arrived cold. Windows were barred. Courtiers had been replaced by jailers. The Versailles silk had long since been traded for gray wool. The queen was still, but she was watching. She watched her children sleep restlessly, their young lives being carved into tragedy. She watched her husband, quiet, heavy, bewildered, grow more solemn by the day. And when the National Convention voted, after much debate and little mercy, to execute the king, she watched that too. January 21st, 1793. He went to the scaffold in silence, firm of step. The blade fell. The crowd cheered. Marie did not. She did not scream. She did not faint. She folded in on herself, as if learning, in that moment, how one carries the weight of a severed half. She became a widow by blade, and now she knew, truly, that there was no crown left, only the memory of one. After Louis's death, the walls of her world shrank further. Her son, Louis Charles, the child she loved, the boy who should have been king, was torn from her arms. He was declared the new Louis XVII by royalists and locked away alone. They would break him slowly, and Marie knew it. She, meanwhile, was left with silence. They called her prisoner, traitor, parasite, but they still feared her. They still watched her. Revolutionaries argued about her fate, as if the revolution would not be complete until her head fell too. She had become a loose thread in the new fabric of France, and they were ready to cut it. But Marie Antoinette did not vanish. Not yet. In her final months, she began to write more. Letters smuggled to Austria. Notes folded into scraps of fabric. She preserved her dignity like it was the last jewel in the box. She mourned her children in silence. She slept on straw. She prayed. And she waited for trial, for judgment, for the sound of footsteps in the hall that would mean the end. It was October 14th, 1793, when they finally dragged Marie Antoinette before the Revolutionary Tribunal. The hall was packed, not with justice, but with fury. Spectators leaned forward like hungry wolves, eager to watch the once queen unravel. The trial wasn't about evidence. It wasn't about truth. It was theater written in advance, lit by vengeance, scored with hatred. She was accused of everything. Treason, of course. Correspondence with Austria. Conspiring to kill the people. Hoarding grain. Plotting escape. Undermining the Republic. That was expected. But then, the final dagger. They accused her of incest with her own son. The room hissed. Marie Antoinette did not cry. She did not scream. She did not plead. Instead, she rose, pale, skeletal, furious in stillness, and said, "If I have not answered, It is because nature itself refuses to respond to such a charge. I appeal to every mother here. And in that moment, something shifted, even among the crowd, even among the women who had cursed her name. There was a flicker of silence. Because for all the rage, for all the politics, for all the blood, she was still, visibly, unshakably, a mother in mourning. But silence does not save in a revolution. The court declared her guilty before she had even stood. The sentence, death by guillotine, it was expected, it was rehearsed, but when the words were spoken, they landed like iron in her lungs. She returned to her cell. She asked for paper. She wrote to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth, a letter half farewell, half confession, all courage. She wrote not to defend herself, but to explain that she had forgiven everyone, even the ones who had condemned her. No last-minute reprieve came. No Austrian army rode through Paris. No ghost of monarchy rose to intercede. Only the night. Only the scratch of the guard's boots. Only the ticking of her last hours. She dressed in white, the color of widowed queens, and prepared to meet the blade. It was October 16th, 1793. Marie Antoinette, once the glittering rose of Versailles, stepped into the gray Paris morning with her hands bound behind her back. Her hair, once piled high in powdered elegance, had been crudely cut to bare her neck for the blade. She wore plain white shift. No jewels, no bal, no crown. The queen was gone. Only the prisoner remained. They placed her in a common cart, not a carriage. No curtains to shield her. No music to drown the jeers. Just the creak of wood, the rumble of iron wheels, and the roar of a crowd hungry for spectacle. The same people who once cheered her wedding now lined the streets to witness her fall. She did not cry. She did not speak. She kept her spine straight, her chin high. Her lips moved, but only in prayer. It was a long journey from the temple prison to the place de la Revolution. Past the bridges, past the markets, past the ghosts of monarchy now turned to ash. Women screamed insults. Men waved fists, but some fell silent as she passed, not out of mercy, but because her calm terrified them. At the scaffold, she stumbled on a step and accidentally stepped on the foot of the executioner. "Pardon me, monsieur. I did not do it on purpose." Those were her last words. The blade fell swiftly. The woman who had once worn diamonds that rivaled constellations was now just another crimson echo on the wooden platform. The crowd cheered. The drums rolled. The revolution had claimed its queen. They buried her body in a common pit, unmarked, unnamed. The grave was not worthy of the woman or the fury she inspired. But history has long fingers. Years later, her remains were exhumed and reburied in the Basilica of St. Denis beside her husband, beneath the solemn gaze of stone saints. The monarchy she had married into was never the same. But her daughter, Marie Therese, survived. Quiet, broken, but alive, the last ember of a vanished flame. Marie Antoinette was not a saint. She was not a villain. She was not a martyr, nor merely a fool in pearls. She was a young girl sent to rule a world that was already dying. A queen made by accident. A scapegoat carved by hunger. A woman who learned, too late, that the crown is a mouth and it devours everything. And still she walked to her death with dignity. That the revolution could never take. Before the Maya carved calendars in stone, before the Aztecs raised temples to pierce the sky, there were the Olmecs. They did not call themselves Olmecs. That name is modern, borrowed guest. In their time, long before time was recorded, they lived along the damp, fertile Gulf Coast of what is now southern Mexico. A land of steaming rivers, choking vines, and endless green. There, beneath the shadow of volcanoes and the breath of hurricanes, rose the first civilization of Mesoamerica. Not just farmers, not just villagers. Civilization. They built, they traded, they dreamed. Around them were animals that would become sacred: jaguars, toads, snakes. They grew maize, beans, squash, and cacao. They crafted jade so finely it shimmered like water. They pressed rubber from trees and shaped it into balls, long before the rules of the game were known. And from the forest they carved colossal heads, 12 feet tall and weighing many tons, serene, helmeted, watching. Always watching. We don't know their names. We don't have their words, but their stone smiles endure. These people, whoever they called themselves, emerged around 1600 BCE. San Lorenzo was their first city, raised like a green jewel on an artificial plateau above the floodplain. It was a feat of engineering, filled with basalt drains, ceremonial plazas, and the strange, staring sculptures that would become their legacy. Later came La Venta, grander, more mysterious, its axis aligned with the stars. Pyramids of earth, altars like thrones, steely telling stories in forgotten tongues. Even now, buried beneath jungle and silence, their geometry defies randomness. These are not casual villages. These were holy cities where stone was given voice. But the Olmecs left no Rosetta Stone, no epics carved in full. What remains are fragments, patterns, silhouettes, broken clues scattered across clay and time. And yet, from those fragments, a whisper rises. They were the first to shape myth in stone, the first to give gods jaguar faces, the first to build the stage upon which all Mesoamerican civilizations would later perform. The Olmecs did not vanish. They were absorbed, echoed, passed on like breath. But that is for later. For now, we begin in the rainforest, where the stone smiles are still half buried and the jungle dreams in green. In the sweltering hush of the Veracruz and Tabasco lowlands, the Olmecs raised cities that did not pierce the sky, but blended into it. No marble calems, no goldomel palaces. Their capitals were made of earth, sculpted, compacted, lifted by hand. They moved mountains grain by grain and shaped sanctuaries from mud and sweat. Their pyramids were not eternal like stone, but they endured centuries, shaped to align with celestial paths, to mirror the heavens in tropical soil. San Lorenzo was the first, not a city, but a vision. Raised upon an artificial ridge between rivers, it overlooked the floodplains like a ruler surveying its domain. Engineers, yes, engineers, carved a vast network of drains from basalt, channeling rainwater through the city like veins through a body. It was not accidental. This was planned, measured, executed. There were plazas, courts, great platforms, sculptures of half-human beasts, reclining lords, and children with unsettling features. Full cheeks, wide eyes, gaping mouths as if mid-cry or chant. Their purpose? Unknown. Their meaning? Debated. But they were made with care, arranged with meaning, placed like punctuation in a sentence we no longer know how to read. Then came La Venta, the jewel of the Olmec world. Built upon an island of dry land in the middle of a swamp, it rose like a mirage. A great central pyramid, the largest in Mesoamerica at the time, rose from earth and clay, a mound shaped like a flame. Around it, altars and tombs and monoliths encircled the sacred axis. They placed their dead in floors of polished serpentine, buried jade masks beside them, gave offerings of hematite and cinnabar. This was not crude. This was not tribal. This was civilization. And beneath their feet, they hid something else. Caches of green stone buried like prayers, hidden mosaics shaped in silence. Then entombed forever. They were not building for themselves. They were building for something or someone greater. Gods, perhaps. Ancestors. The land. These were not cities of commerce or conquest. These were ceremonial engines. Sacred machines made of soil and devotion, humming with meaning now lost in the undergrowth. Time has swallowed their symmetry. The jungle has taken back its bones. But in the satellite images, the alignment remains. In the soil cores, the evidence sings. And in the hearts of later peoples, the Maya, the Zapotec, the Mexica, the echoes are clear. The Olmecs taught Mesoamerica how to build. But more than that, they taught it why. They stare at us still, from museum halls, jungle clearings, and deep vaults of shadowed time. The Olmec heads, 17 of them that we know, colossal, solemn, immovable, each one unique. Each one carved from basalt hauled dozens of miles from distant volcanic slopes. Moved, somehow, without wheels, without beasts of burden, only by muscle, log, rope, and will. These are not anonymous monuments. These are portraits. Every curve of lip, flare of nose, angle of cheek, deliberate. These were people. Lords, perhaps. Ball players, maybe. Ancestors immortalized, not in myth, but in mass. Their helmets fit snug, carved with bands and crests, suggesting ritual or sport, or both. Their eyes, wide, watching, do not gaze to the heavens but into us. They are not smiling, and yet they are not grim. They are serene, knowing, as though they've seen something we have not, as though they still remember names the earth has forgotten. But the heads are not the only faces the Olmecs carved. They left us strange figurines, infantile, distorted, powerful, tiny bodies with mouths agape, eyes almond-shaped, heads flattened or rounded with intention. Scholars debate, were they gods, changelings, sacred children, the beginnings of a pantheon or echoes of a mythology now irretrievable? And there are others, jaguar-faced men, human-limbed beasts, the were-jaguar, as archaeologists call them, mouths curved in mid-roar or moan. Their faces straddle the line between hunter and hunted, parent and predator. For the Olmecs, the jaguar was not just a symbol of power. It was a portal, a god perhaps, or an ancestor reborn in fur and fawn. These images, stylized, precise, appear again and again in carvings, sculptures, engraved celts, and jade pendants. The jaguar was not decoration. It was cosmology. It may be that these creatures, these hybrids, were the embodiment of transformation, from man to god, child to king, breath to myth. The Olmecs did not write what they believed, but they carved it over and over into clay, into jade, into stone that still breathes their story. In these visages we see no empire, no conquest, no banners or written records. Only expression, emotion carved into eternity. They left no language we can read, but their eyes are still open, and they are waiting for someone to understand. To stand where the Olmecs stood is to feel the breath of a world made of shadow and pulse, where the veil between human and divine was thinner than mist, and everything, river, jaguar, maze, was sacred. We do not know the names of their gods. No hymns survive, no myths etched in stone, no pantheon with faces we can catalog. And yet, their gods are everywhere. In the snarling mouths of were-jaguars, in the slouch of crouching toads, in the curves of celts carved with flames and claws. These were not mere decorative flourishes. They were cosmology, writ in motion and mineral. The Olmec world was not separated into sacred and profane. It was all one. A jaguar was not just a jaguar. It was power in motion, the embodiment of night, fertility, and fear. A mountain was not just a landform. It was a living ancestor, the womb of rain and stone. Maize was not just sustenance. It was birth, death, and resurrection incarnate. They did not write myth, they built it. Their pyramids mimicked mountains. Their plazas mirrored the stars. Their altars, massive stone blocks, some carved with human figures inside, evoke images of birth, sacrifice, or descent into the underworld. Some believe they represent caves, entrances to other realms. Others see them as thrones for divine kings. Perhaps both. Even their burial sites hum with intention. In La Venta, beneath layers of sacred earth, archaeologists uncovered mosaic pavements of green serpentine, intricate masks and designs buried, not to be seen, but to be remembered by the earth itself. They buried symbols, not just bodies. And in their tombs, offerings, jade figurines in frozen procession, crimson-stained floors of cinnabar, bundles of conch shells and shark teeth far from the sea. Everything precise, everything ritualized. There is no war imagery, no wars, no weapon catches, but there is sacrifice, not necessarily bloody, but ceremonial. Offerings to gods we cannot name, for purposes we can only guess. This was a civilization rooted not in domination, but in devotion. And their gods, though silent, still linger in the soil, in the humid breath of the rainforest, in the feline flicker of eyes beneath the leaves. Somewhere in the jungle, myth still walks, and stone still dreams. The Olmecs were not isolated. They were not lost in their jungles. They were the pulse beneath the skin of a continent, sending ideas, symbols, and jade across the spine of Mesoamerica. From their hands flowed a language of images that others would adopt, reshape, and claim. Jaguar-masked gods, cross-legged rulers, cleft-headed infants, sacred mountains of clay. Centuries later, the Maya would write them into glyphs. The Zapotec would carve their echoes on tomb walls. The Mexico would whisper their names through obsidian masks. The Olmecs moved ideas, but they also moved stone. Jade from Guatemala, obsidian from Highland Mexico, iron, ore, and serpentine, shark teeth, and spondylus shells. These were not souvenirs. These were currency, sacred, symbolic, treasured. They traded along rivers and coasts, along invisible roads carved by footstep and memory. Their rubber balls, hardened from tree sap, made their way to distant cities. Their polished celts, like green lightning frozen in stone, have been found hundreds of miles away. Their style became a lingua franca of power. To carve in the Olmec way was to speak legitimacy. And in return, fish, salt, feathers, cacao, stone labor. Perhaps even stories. For the Olmecs did not merely barter goods, they bartered meaning. At the heart of this network were the cities, San Lorenzo, La Venta, Tres Zapotes. Like beating hearts, they pushed culture through arteries of jungle and marsh. They were not alone, but they were first, the lodestar by which later civilizations would find their course. And when San Lorenzo declined, perhaps through flood, rebellion, or exhaustion, La Venta rose. And when La Venta faded, Tres Zapotes stirred. Not collapse, transformation. The same river flowing through new channels. Even in their silence, the Olmecs were generous. They gave Mesoamerica a script of gods and kings, a compass of art and ritual. They were a root system beneath the forest, unseen but essential. We do not have their names, but their fingerprints are everywhere. Every time a priest stood atop a pyramid, every time a ruler donned a jaguar pelt, every time a child was buried with a jade mask, the Olmecs were there, whispering beneath the ceremony. Trade is never just economics. It is belief passing from hand to hand. And the Olmecs believed in form, in symbol, in stone. No trampit soundeth. No invader came. No fire swallowed the temples. The Olmecs did not fall. They faded. Around 400 years before the Common Era, La Venta, their last great ceremonial city, emptied. There were no mass graves, no signs of battle, just stillness. The plazas, once alive with drums and incense, grew quiet. The altars, once kissed by fire and offerings, were left to moss and rain. The colossal heads were toppled, not shattered, not looted, just lowered with care, then buried. A farewell, not a desecration. And then, nothing. What happened? No one is certain. Perhaps the rivers shifted, turning fertile soil into salt and dust. Perhaps the rains grew cruel or the floods too frequent. Perhaps trade routes changed, leaders waned, and the sacred lost its pull. Or perhaps the Olmecs did what all great cultures eventually do. They changed. They did not vanish. They became. You can see their shadow in the highlands of Oaxaca, in the steppe temples of the Maya, in the jaguar masks of the Mexica. The gods the Olmecs carved in stone were renamed, redressed, but never forgotten. Their aesthetic, almond eyes, cleft heads, curled mouths, traveled further than any army ever could. We call them Olmecs, a name meaning the rubber people, coined centuries later by the Nawa. We do not know what they called themselves. Their words are lost. Their myths are silent, but their hands still speak. In stone, in jade, in silence that hums with memory. Their colossal heads still sit heavy with knowing. Their buried mosaics still sleep beneath layers of earth and time. Their sacred geometry remains, aligned to stars no longer visible in the night sky, but once followed like scripture. They did not build for eternity. They built for memory. And though the names are gone, the myth endures, whispered by rivers, guarded by trees, and carved forever into the bones of the earth. England, in the year of our Lord 1605, was a kingdom already half on fire, not with flames, but with the slow-burning coals of resentment, betrayal, and the terrible silence of a nation at prayer, divided. On the throne sat James I, son of Mary, Queen of Scots, a king not born of England, but now wrapped in its crown. He called himself Protestant. The law did too. The land, though, was laced with Catholics, quiet, careful, and persecuted. Not with fire and sword, perhaps. Not anymore. But with taxes, fines, whispers, watching eyes. The air was thick with suspicion. To be Catholic in England was to live in the shadow between law and treason. You could not marry openly. You could not hear Mass without fear. You could not dream of office or university or courtly rank. You were subject to oaths you could not swear, to truths you could not speak aloud. And yet, thousands remained. Families who remembered a time before Elizabeth's sword cut through the old religion. Families who taught their children to cross themselves in secret, to hide the priest in a cupboard when the magistrate came calling. King James had promised tolerance. That was the cruelest part. When he first rose to the throne in 1603, whispers ran through the Catholic houses. Perhaps now, perhaps peace? He was Mary's son, was he not? Wasn't she a martyr? Didn't his wife, Queen Anne, cross herself at the Danish court? But the promises turned to dust in the mouth. The recusancy laws stayed. Fines increased. And in Parliament, the same old names rose again to argue that England must be guarded against popish conspiracies, foreign invasion, the Pope's wicked hand. Catholics, once again, found themselves painted not as citizens, but as enemies, as threats. And in the deep, still dark places of England, something stirred. Not a prayer, not a sermon, a plot. A small group of men, bound by faith and fury, met in secret. Among them, Robert Catesby, fierce-eyed and burning with purpose. Thomas Wintour, quiet and precise. Jack Wright, the swordsman, and a man from Yorkshire, newly returned from wars on the continent. A man who knew gunpowder. A man with a soldier's calm and a martyr's stare. Guy Fawkes. They would not beg for tolerance. They would demand it in thunder. Not with words, not with parchment or petitions, but with fire. They would blow Parliament sky high and take the king with it. It began with 5. Robert Catesby was the fire at the center. A Catholic gentleman from Northamptonshire, bold, persuasive, and desperate. He had lost everything under the crown's laws: money, safety, even his father. The England he saw was not a nation at peace, but a slow execution in daylight. And he would no longer watch it die by inches. No more fines, no more waiting. Action. He gathered 4 others. Thomas Wintour, his kinsman, a cautious diplomat turned co-conspirator. Jack Wright, a swordsman with a reputation for silent violence. Thomas Percy, cousin to the powerful Earl of Northumberland, who walked the corridors of power with a half-smile and deadly ambition. And then, the stranger, the one with fire in his bones. Guy Fawkes, a soldier, a Catholic who had fought for Spain, smuggled priests across borders, and studied the ways of powder and fuse. He had seen the face of war, and now he would bring it to London. In a small inn near Lambeth, the 5 made their vow. They swore it on holy bread and on swords and in silence. A secret pact to strike a blow so fierce, so spectacular, that England would never recover. They would kill the king. They would kill the royal family. They would kill Parliament entire. And from the ashes, build a Catholic realm. But great fire needs careful timber. And so the plot grew. In the shadows of Westminster, they rented a house, close, too close, to Parliament itself. They posed as common men, merchants, tradesmen, laborers. Guy Fawkes took the name John Johnson, a servant to Percy, a quiet man with gloves and a beard and a barrel-chested walk. No one questioned him. They tunneled first, beneath the Parliament buildings, days and weeks of sweat and mud and risk. The work was slow, the danger immense, but then came luck or providence or perhaps temptation. A storeroom became available, right beneath the House of Lords. Percy secured it. No one noticed. One by one, they brought in the powder. 36 barrels, enough to crack stone and splinter oak, enough to bring the very ceiling of government down on the men within it. They stored it beneath firewood and coal, hid in layers. Guy tended it like a priest at an altar. He checked the fuses, measured the pressure, waited, but fire cannot wait forever. And faith is not always silent. More men were needed, more money, more secrecy. The 5 became 6, then 8, then 13. Each new name added risk. Francis Tresham, who could not keep his mouth shut. Robert Keyes, keeper of keys and nerves. Christopher Wright, Jack's brother. Ever more voices, ever more chances for the whole thing to unravel. And always, Parliament's reopening loomed. November 5th. That would be the day. The king, the lords, the bishops, the judges, all in one chamber. One spark, one instant. A new England would rise from the ruins. And yet, 13 men in a cellar is not a government. It is a funeral waiting for a bell. Autumn came early to London that year, damp and watchful. Fog clung to rooftops. Firewood prices rose. And beneath the stones of Westminster, the barrels waited like sleeping dragons. But powder is patient only until men are not. By mid-October, tensions split the group like a rotten beam. 13 men, one plan, and a dozen doubts. Whispers of second thoughts. Murmurs about the innocent. The collateral. The guilt. Could they really kill them all? The lords, yes. The bishops, perhaps. But the common men? The peers who had done no harm, but were still set to die? It was Francis Tresham, always uneasy, always twitching, who made the fatal move. Somewhere between guilt and cowardice, between brotherhood and betrayal, he picked up a quill. Not a public letter, not a confession, just a warning. A soft-spoken, ghost-written note. No signature, no seed, just words wrapped in smoke. He sent it to his brother-in-law, Lord Monteagle, a Catholic noble due to sit in Parliament on November 5th. My lord, out of the love I bear to some of your friends, I would advise you as you tender your life to devise some excuse to shift your attendance at this Parliament. They shall receive a terrible blow this Parliament, yet they shall not see who hurts them. The letter was cryptic and chilling. Monteagle, startled and wise enough not to ignore such things, did not slip away quietly. He brought the letter to Robert Cecil, the Earl of Salisbury, the spymaster, the puppet master, the man who had watched Catholics and courtiers alike with a pen in one hand and a dagger in the other. Cecil read the letter, once, twice, then again, and he smiled. Here it was, proof of a plot, not just suspicion, not vague whispers in smoky taverns, but something real, something explosive, a chance to crush not just the plotters, but the entire cause they claimed to serve. A trap sprung without bait. He told the king, slowly, deliberately, not once. Let the fools act. Let them think all was well. Meanwhile, spies circled, watchmen doubled, and the cellar beneath the House of Lords, once ignored, was placed under quiet surveillance. Still, Guy Fawkes watched his barrels, calm and unreadable, a sword at his side, matches in his cloak, unaware, perhaps, or too far gone to care. He had not flinched in battle. He would not flinch now, but the net was drawing tight, and powder does not betray. People do. It was the evening of November 4th, the last quiet hour before a kingdom cracked. The cellar beneath the House of Lords lay silent, dimly lit by lanterns. Outside, London was hushed beneath a thickening fog, the air laced with coal smoke and secrets. And there, among barrels wrapped in straw and shadow, stood Guy Fawkes. He had been here all day, guarding the powder. He looked like any man might look after months of lying, of tunneling, of waiting. Worn boots, dust on his cuffs, hands calloused from work. But beneath the rough exterior was something else, a soldier's steel and a martyr's calm. He had no illusions about what was to come. If the plan succeeded, hundreds would die in one thunderclap. Lords, bishops, judges, the king. Fawkes would be far away, escaping across the Thames in the chaos. But if it failed and the trap was sprung, then he would die. Slowly, publicly, painfully, and he would not run. He had prepared the fuses, measured the charges. In his pockets, a watch to count the moments, a lantern to see in the dark, slow matches wrapped in linen, the tools of obliteration. A single flame, and history would change its course. But history had already noticed. At midnight, the knock came. A search party, polite but insistent, arrived at the cellar. It was not unusual. Parliament would open in the morning. Security was expected. Fawkes greeted them calmly, called himself John Johnson, a servant, here to tend the firewood for his master, Mr. Percy. They nodded. They left. But something did not sit right. At 1 a.m, they returned, this time with orders. The king's orders. They found Fawkes in the cellar again. Still calm, still armed, a match in his coat, a watch on his belt, and then the barrels. 36 of them. Enough to shatter every stone in Westminster. Enough to leave nothing but smoke and blood where once sat the Crown and the Commons. Fawkes did not run. He drew his sword, but he was outnumbered, surrounded, and taken. He gave his name, John Johnson. He gave no confession. He gave them nothing. And still, the sun had not risen. In that cold, echoing hour, beneath the stones of Parliament, the match went out. But the flame, the idea, had already lit. At dawn on November 5th, the bells of London rang out, not in celebration, but in warning. The king had been spared. Parliament still stood. The people, bleary-eyed and cold, poured into the streets with whispers on their tongues. They tried to kill the king, they said. They tried to blow us all to hell. And in the Tower of London, Guy Fawkes, or John Johnson, as he still insisted, waited in chains. He spoke little. At first, nothing. He had been trained for silence. He had endured worse on the battlefield. Pain was not new to him, but this pain would be different. England had its ways of extracting the truth, and the Tower had seen them all. The rack. Cold, steel, and slow. Limbs pulled taut until joints shattered. Muscles tore. Breath left the lungs in howls. Even the strongest men broke eventually. Even Guy Fawkes. Over the days that followed, he cracked. Een by een, name by name. He spoke of Catesby, of Percy, of the Wrights, and Wintour. He admitted the plan. He confessed the fire. He signed his name, a barely legible scrawl from a hand no longer steady. The signature still survives, a trembling ghost of the man he had been. And with that ink, the hunt began. Across the countryside, the plotters fled. Catesby and Percy rode north, hoping for allies, for a rebellion, for salvation. But England was not with them. The Catholic nobles did not rise. The people were frightened, not inspired. The rebellion sputtered before it sparked. On November 8th, they made their final stand at Holbesch House. Surrounded, outgunned, they lit powder to blind their foes and were consumed by their own flame. Catesby died with a bullet through his heart, sword still in hand. Percy fell beside him. Others were captured. Thomas Wintour, Robert Keyes, Ambrose Rookwood, dragged back to London in chains. The trial would come, but the sentence was already written. High treason, the highest. And so the punishment, hanged, drawn, and quartered, to be paraded through the streets, half alive, butchered in public as a warning. The king had been merciful. He spared Guy Fawkes the final agony. On the scaffold, Fawkes leapt from the gallows, breaking his own neck. His body was still quartered, his head still displayed. The others met the full fate. No prayers were heard, no pardons given, only blood and silence. The fires died down, the crowds dispersed, but England was not unchanged. In the weeks that followed the failed plot, something heavy settled over the kingdom. Not relief. Not exactly victory, but vigilance. Suspicion. A tightening of the noose. The gunpowder plot had failed, spectacularly, violently, definitively. But the idea that 13 men could come that close to annihilating the entire English government sent shockwaves through the monarchy, the church, and the people. King James survived, yes. Parliament still stood. But something fundamental had shifted. Fear, that old architect of nations, picked up its tools once more. Catholics across England paid the price. Laws hardened like frost. Recusanti finis multiples. Masses driven deeper underground. Priests hunted with renewed fury. The tolerant promises of James's early reign were buried under rubble and soot. One act of terror became the excuse for decades of repression. Children were taught to hate the memory of the plotters. Pulpits thundered against papist treachery. And every November 5th, fires would blaze not in mourning, but in triumph. Bonfires lit across the land, celebrating the survival of the crown, the nation, the divine order. They burned Guy Fawkes in effigy. They rang the bells. They called it Gunpowder Treason Day. And they remembered, or were told to remember, what almost happened. But beneath the smoke and sermons, something more complicated lingered. Because Guy Fawkes, broken, tortured, executed, did not vanish. He became something else. Not a hero, not quite a villain, but a symbol of rage against power, of faith twisted into flame, of a line between martyr and terrorist, drawn not in stone, but in smoke. Centuries passed, monarchs changed, empires rose and fell. And yet, every November, the story returned. A fire in the night, a man with a match, a plot that almost swallowed a kingdom whole. Today, the effigies still burn. The fireworks still scream. But history, like gunpowder, is never as stable as it seems. And somewhere, deep beneath Westminster, under the stones and ceremony, the ghosts of 36 barrels still sleep.